The morning, I realized something was wrong. I was standing in the kitchen at 6:45, holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold, staring at my own phone like it belonged to someone else. My name is Daniel. I'm 38 years old. I design bridges for a living. And until about 11 months ago, I would have told you, honestly, without hesitation, that I had a good life. Not a perfect one, but solid. The kind of life you build on purpose, one deliberate choice at a time. I'd been with Mara for 12 years, married for 9. We had a son named Owen, who was 7 and obsessed with dinosaurs and had a laugh that could stop a room. We had a house on Birchwood Lane in Cedar Falls with a front porch that needed repainting every 3 years and a backyard maple that dropped leaves like it was personally trying to bury us. On paper, everything was fine. But there I was, scrolling through my contacts at 6:45 in the morning, and the name I was looking for wasn't there. Not just that name. 3 others weren't there either. I told myself I'd deleted them by accident, that I'd been cleaning up my phone and gone too far, the way you sometimes do late at night when you're half asleep and your thumb is making decisions your brain hasn't approved yet. I even checked the recently deleted folder. Empty. I checked my recent calls. The last time I'd called my friend Marcus was 4 weeks ago, and that number still showed in recent calls, but it wasn't saved anywhere in my contacts anymore. Neither was Joel. Neither was Pete. Neither was my coworker Ramona, who sometimes texted me about project deadlines and whose number I'd had saved for 2 years. I stood there, thinking, I didn't do this. And then, very quietly, a different thought followed that one. If I didn't do this, who did? I should explain who I am, and who Mara is, and what kind of marriage we had, because none of what happened later makes sense without the context of the years that came before it. I grew up in a family where arguments were avoided the way you avoid black ice on a highway. Carefully, deliberately, often by changing direction entirely. My father was a quiet man who kept things smooth. My mother was warm but anxious. Their way of handling conflict was to let it pass, redirect, smooth it over. I learned that model so well I didn't even know I'd learned it. I just thought that's what love looked like, managing the temperature, keeping things calm, not pushing on the sore spots. I'm a structural engineer. I calculate loads, stresses, the invisible pressures that act on things over time. I'm good at it. But for most of my adult life, I applied none of that precision to my own relationships. I didn't calculate the load. I just assumed the structure would hold. Mara was different from anyone I'd been with before. She was sharp, quick, and absolutely certain about everything. What restaurant, what paint color, what route to take on a road trip, what kind of father I should be, and what kind of husband I was and wasn't. At 26, when we started dating, I found that certainty magnetic. She made decisions easily, and I had spent my whole life uncomfortable with conflict. She seemed like the missing piece. I didn't understand, for a long time, that what I was attracted to and what was good for me were 2 entirely different things. We had good years. Real ones. The first 4, maybe 5 years of our marriage were genuinely happy. The normal friction of 2 people building a life, nothing more. Owen came along in our 4th year together, and he cracked both of us open in the best possible way. For a while, it felt like we'd gotten everything right. The shift came gradually. So gradually, I couldn't name it while it was happening. It started with small preferences becoming small rules. Mara had always had strong opinions, but they used to feel like invitations. Try this restaurant. You'll love it. Trust me. Somewhere in there, the invitations became something else. Not orders, exactly, but something with more weight. A particular kind of silence when I chose differently. A comment delivered lightly, with a smile, that somehow landed harder than it should have. Do you really need to see Joel tonight? You just saw him last month. I don't know why you still text Pete. You always come home in a weird mood after you've talked to him. Marcus makes everything into a competition. I don't think he's actually a good friend to you, Daniel. I heard those things and I processed them the way I'd been trained my whole life to process discomfort. I nodded. I considered. I let it go. I was a conflict avoider. I told myself she was probably right. I told myself I was choosing my marriage over my social life, and that was what mature adults did. I didn't understand what was actually happening until 4 contacts disappeared from my phone, and I stood in the kitchen at 6:45 in the morning, asking myself who had done it. Looking back now, that moment was the first time I let myself see something I had been carefully not seeing for years. Not a suspicion about infidelity. That's not what this story is about. This is a different kind of betrayal, And in some ways, it's harder to name because it doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in. It disguises itself as care. It calls itself love. It wasn't until I was standing there with that cold mug of coffee that I thought, this has been going on for a very long time. I put my phone face down on the counter. Owen came down the stairs in his dinosaur pajamas, dragging his stuffed triceratops by one horn. He climbed onto his stool at the kitchen island and said, "Dad, is there cereal?" "There's always cereal," I said. I poured him a bowl. I smiled. I went through the motions of the morning: toast, backpack, the 10-minute drive to Ridgemont Elementary. And I didn't say anything to Mara, who was getting dressed upstairs and had her work planner open on the bathroom counter, already 30 minutes into her day before the day had officially started. She came down as I was putting on my coat. She kissed my cheek. She smelled like the lavender lotion she always used, and her hair was done, and she looked exactly the way she always looked in the morning, composed and purposeful and slightly ahead of schedule. "Have a good day," she said. "You too," I said. I drove Owen to school. And on the way back, instead of going directly to the office, I pulled into the parking lot of a gas station on Rutland Avenue and sat there for 20 minutes, going back through the last year in my head, trying to count how many times I'd stopped calling someone because Mara had made it feel like a bad idea. I lost count before I got to 10. Mara worked as an event coordinator for a mid-sized corporate venue downtown called the Meridian. It was good work for her. She was precise. She was organized. She had a talent for making complicated logistics feel effortless, and she liked being in charge of how things looked and felt and unfolded. She was genuinely good at her job. Her clients loved her. Her boss had promoted her twice in 4 years. Our life, from the outside, ran smoothly. We had a routine. Owen was in 2nd grade and doing well. I was managing a 3-bridge infrastructure project that kept me busy but not buried. We had date nights twice a month, and they were always Mara's idea. She'd research the restaurant, make the reservation, choose what day worked. I'd follow her lead. It functioned. The phone contacts disappeared in early October. I didn't confront her right away. I want to be honest about that. I sat on what I'd found for almost 2 weeks, turning it over quietly in my head, the way I always handled things that made me uncomfortable, not ignoring them exactly, but not quite ready to bring them into the open. During those 2 weeks, I started paying attention in a different way. I noticed that Mara had a habit of checking my phone. Not sneaking, nothing as furtive as that. She'd just pick it up from the counter if it was unlocked, glance at it, set it back. She'd done that for years, and I'd never thought much of it. But watching it with fresh eyes, I counted. She checked my phone 4 times in 10 days. Each time, she set it back down with the same neutral expression she used when she was deciding something had passed inspection. I noticed that she'd started volunteering information about my calendar before I'd mentioned it. "You don't have anything after 7 on Thursday, right?" I'd say yes, and she'd nod, satisfied. At the time, I thought she was just planning ahead. Later, I understood she was verifying. And I noticed something else, small, easy to explain away, that I flagged and then set aside. 2 Sundays after the contacts disappeared, I mentioned that I'd run into Marcus at the hardware store that morning. A coincidence, nothing more. I was there for weather stripping. He was there for a new drill bit. We'd talked for maybe 8 minutes in the fasteners aisle, caught up briefly, laughed about something stupid. I mentioned it at dinner, the way you mention an unremarkable part of your day. Mara didn't respond immediately. She reached for the salt shaker, even though she hadn't tasted the food yet. Her hand found it, moved it, set it back down without adding any salt. "How is he?" she asked. Her voice was completely even. "Fine," I said. "Same as always." She cut a piece of chicken. "Did he mention the thing with his girlfriend?" "What thing?" "Oh." A slight pause. "Never mind. I might have heard that wrong." She didn't bring it up again. And the thing about Mara was that she was so consistently good at keeping her voice neutral, at delivering things with a small, puzzled frown rather than anything that read as accusatory, that in the moment it was genuinely hard to decide. Was that a warning shot or just conversation? I told myself it was just conversation. That was the behavioral choice I kept making, month after month. Not asking the question I was starting to form. Not because I was stupid, but because I was afraid of where it led. I didn't ask. Not because I didn't want to know, but because I was afraid of what the asking would cost. At work, things were good. I had a team of 5 on the Cedar Falls Bridge project, a pedestrian overpass being rebuilt across the Dry Fork Creek. Nothing glamorous, but technically interesting. My lead engineer, a 32-year-old named Trish, had started joining the team for Thursday lunches at a place called Kilpatrick's, a diner 3 blocks from our office that did a decent club sandwich. 4 of us would go. We'd talk about work, talk about nothing, sit in a vinyl booth for an hour. I mentioned Kilpatrick's to Mara one Thursday evening. "Who goes?" she asked. "Me, Trish, Amos, sometimes Kevin." A beat. Then, "Trish is the one who keeps pushing back on your timeline estimates." "She's thorough," I said. "That's her job. I just wonder if it's a professional lunch or a social thing." She said it mildly, looking at her phone. "Because if it's social, you could be spending that time on your actual work and coming home earlier." I said something like, "It's fine, it's just an hour." And she nodded and said, "Of course, I'm just thinking about your schedule." She wasn't wrong, exactly. That was the thing. She never said anything you could cleanly argue with. Every concern was framed as caring, as thinking ahead, as knowing me better than I knew myself. And because I had spent my whole life with people who expressed love through managing, I recognized the pattern and called it familiar and didn't call it what it was. Looking back now, that conversation about Trish was the moment I should have said something. Not angrily, not defensively, but clearly. I didn't. I kept the peace. I kept the peace for so long I forgot I was doing it. 3 weeks after the contacts vanished, I finally asked. I chose a Saturday morning, Owen at his grandmother's for the weekend. I'd thought about how to raise it. I'd rehearsed several versions. What came out was simpler than any of them. "Mara," I said, "did you delete some contacts from my phone?" She was at the kitchen table with her planner. She looked up without urgency. "Which contacts?" she said. "Marcus, Joel, Pete, Ramona from my office." She held my eyes for a moment, then looked back at her planner. "I cleaned up your phone a while back. You had so many duplicates and old numbers, it was a mess. I might have removed some I didn't recognize." "You didn't recognize Marcus or Joel?" "I didn't know their last names were in there." Her pen moved. "If you want them back, just ask them for their numbers again." I sat with that for a second. "Did you do it without telling me?" I asked. "Daniel." She looked up again, and now there was the faintest edge of patience wearing thin in her expression. "I was trying to help. I do things like that for you all the time. I take care of things so you don't have to. I didn't ask you to take care of my contacts." "No," she said. "You didn't ask me. Because you never ask for help. You just let things pile up, and then when I try to help, I'm somehow in the wrong." I looked at her. Something in the conversation had shifted, and I couldn't quite locate the moment it happened. "That's not what I said," I said. "It's what you're implying." She closed the planner. She stood up, picked up her coffee, and went to the sink, and her posture communicated something I recognized. "Conversation over, registered under your name as an overreaction." I went to the garage and stood there for a while, pretending to look for something on the shelf. She told me, much later, what had been going through her mind in those weeks, the internal version of events I wasn't privy to at the time. I knew he'd notice eventually. I'd been careful. I went through the list slowly, over 2 sessions, so it wouldn't look like a single purge. Contacts he didn't use often. Numbers that were easier to lose than explain. I told myself it was maintenance, the same as keeping the house organized. If his life ran through me, he wouldn't need anyone else to reach for. I know how that sounds. I knew then, too. But knowing how something sounds and being able to stop yourself, those aren't always the same thing. That's what I told myself in that kitchen while he was asking me about the contacts, that I'd done a housekeeping task and he was making it bigger than it was. And I almost believed it. Almost. That's what I told myself. I knew, even then, that I was lying. November arrived with the cold that stays. The Dry Fork Overpass project had moved into its structural review phase, which meant long days and a lot of back and forth with the city's engineering inspector, a meticulous man named Harold who questioned every load calculation twice. I was coming home later, and Mara was accommodating about it. Dinners kept warm, Owen's bedtime managed, everything handled, and I let myself fold back into gratitude for a while. For a while, the Kilpatrick's lunches had quietly stopped. I hadn't made a decision about them. They just faded. Trish had suggested moving the team lunch to Fridays. I'd said maybe, and somehow it never happened. I noticed the absence about 6 weeks after the last one. The way you notice a tooth that used to ache has stopped. Not sure if it's healed or just gone quiet. One Friday evening, Marcus texted me from a new number. "Hey man, got a new phone. Save this." Then, "Want to catch the game Sunday? Sports bar on 5th, the usual." I typed back, "Sounds good. I'll check with Mara." I checked with Mara. She was putting Owen to bed. I stood in the hallway and waited until she came out. "Marcus wants to watch the game Sunday," I said. "The afternoon game, maybe 3 hours." She tilted her head slightly. "Sundays when we were going to do the hall closet. We've been saying we're going to do the hall closet for 2 months. Because we keep getting pulled away. I thought we'd agreed Sunday was dedicated house time." I didn't remember agreeing to that. But I also couldn't point to a specific moment where the agreement had or hadn't happened, which was the thing about these conversations. They always had that quality, a slightly uncertain ground where my memories and her stated version didn't quite line up, and I never knew if I was right or if I'd just forgotten. "I can help with the closet in the morning," I said. "The game's at 2. She looked at me. Something behind her eyes did a small calculation. "Fine," she said. "But I think it's interesting." "What's interesting?" "That Marcus texts you out of nowhere after weeks of no contact, and your first instinct is to rearrange your Sunday. He's my friend." "Of course." She walked past me toward the bedroom. "I just noticed that when I ask you to set aside time for us, it takes 3 conversations. He texts once, and you're already negotiating." I stood in the hallway for a moment after she went in. Then I went back downstairs and texted Marcus. "Something came up Sunday. Let's plan for next week." I put my phone in my pocket and stayed very still for a moment. That was the moment I should have recognized for what it was. Not a disagreement about a Sunday schedule. Something was being measured and managed, and I was cooperating with the measurement without ever deciding to. What made it hard to see clearly was that Mara was never cruel. That's the thing I keep returning to even now. She never raised her voice, never made a scene, never did anything that would look bad from outside the house. She was a loving mother to Owen, patient, present, imaginative. She had dinner parties where she was funny and gracious and made everyone feel welcome. Her colleagues adored her. Our neighbors on Birchwood Lane thought she was wonderful. The control she exerted over me existed in a register that was nearly invisible, in the space between what was said and what was meant, in the timing of a sigh, in a particular way she had of praising my choices that made me feel like I'd passed a test I hadn't known I was taking. I started keeping a kind of mental log, not written down. I wasn't ready for anything that concrete, but a running track in my head of moments that fell off. There was the evening I mentioned that my college roommate, Ben, was going to be in Des Moines for a conference and wanted to grab dinner if I could make the drive. Mara's response: "I hope you're not planning to stay over. You have the city call at 8 on Monday." I wasn't planning to stay over, but I noticed I hadn't said that yet. There was the time Trish sent me a work email on a Saturday evening, and Mara, glancing at my phone, which was lying on the coffee table, said, "She emails you on weekends?" with an inflection I couldn't quite name. Not accusatory. Not exactly. Just present and pointed. There was the Sunday I drove to my parents' house for dinner alone, because Owen had a cold and Mara stayed home with him. A normal Sunday. But when I got home around 8, she asked who was there, who I'd talked to, whether my brother's wife had been around, and whether I'd seen anyone from the old neighborhood. It was the third question, whether my brother's wife had been around, that made the hair on my neck stand up, because I couldn't think of a reason why that question mattered. She noticed that I paused. She said, "I'm just curious," and smiled, and that was the end of it. But the pause was mine. I heard it. She told me about this period later, much later, after everything had broken open. I didn't know it then. This is what she was living through. There was a version of me that I showed Daniel. Organized, capable, loving. And then there was the version of me that woke up at 3 in the morning convinced he was going to leave. Not for anyone else. Just leave. Find his way back to a version of himself that didn't include me at the center of it. The fear was old. It was older than Daniel. It came from somewhere I hadn't finished dealing with. And instead of dealing with it, I had built systems, ways of managing his world so that nothing could reach him from outside it without going through me first. The phone contacts were the worst thing I'd done. I knew that. I knew it when I did it, and I knew it more in those weeks after, watching him carry the knowing without naming it. I kept waiting for it to become a fight, a real one. And when he asked me directly about the contacts and I redirected it, and he went to the garage, I felt relief. Which told me something about myself I wasn't ready to hear. That's what I told myself in the garage, that he was letting it go, that we were fine. I held on to that. Owen's second-grade teacher, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Delacroix, sent home a note in early November saying that Owen had been unusually quiet in class and she wanted to check in. The note was warm and professional and suggested nothing alarming. Just a child going through a phase, the normal turbulence of 7. I read it and felt something pull in my chest. He was 7 and something was affecting him, and I had been so deep in my own internal fog that I hadn't noticed. I brought it up with Mara that night. She read the note twice, her expression carefully composed. "He's been fine at home," she said. "I know, but Mrs. Delacroix is saying he's not himself at school. Teachers sometimes project." She set the note on the counter. "Or he has a social thing with one of the kids and it'll pass. Children go quiet sometimes." I watched her put the note under the fruit bowl, beneath the bananas. Anchored there. Filed. "I want to talk to him," I said. "Of course," she said. "But don't make a big thing of it. He doesn't need to feel scrutinized." That Saturday morning, I took Owen to the park alone. Just us, a rare thing lately. We kicked a soccer ball around for a while, and I asked, casual, how school was going. He said fine. I asked if there were kids he liked hanging out with. He named 2 boys. I asked if there was anything bothering him. He shrugged, which with Owen was different from a teenage shrug. This was the 7-year-old version of genuinely searching for words. "Mom said we can't go to Marcus's birthday party," he said, "because of the drive. But I wanted to go." Marcus's birthday party. I hadn't known there was one. "When's the party?" I asked. "It was last weekend," Owen said. I made him a card, but we didn't go. I kept my face neutral. I said, "Got it, buddy." We kicked the ball some more. On the drive home, I thought about the fact that Marcus had texted me from a new number 3 weeks earlier. "Save this, catch the game Sunday," and had not mentioned a birthday party, which meant either the party came up after that text, or he'd stopped expecting me to show up to things. I thought about which of those was more likely. December. I started making calls. Not confrontational, not strategic, just the quiet act of reaching out to the people I'd been drifting from, testing what was actually there. I texted Marcus from work, a Tuesday afternoon. "Sorry I've been off the grid. Let's actually catch up. Free Thursday evening?" He responded within 10 minutes. "About time. Thursday works. Your usual spot?" We met at a bar called Carver's on Cedar Street, one I'd been going to since before I met Mara. It had dark wood and bad sight lines, and the bartender knew to bring a second beer before you'd finish the first. Marcus was already there when I arrived, sitting at the corner table with his coat still on. We talked the way old friends talk when they haven't seen each other in too long. Broad strokes at first, catching up on surface details, and then gradually something relaxing between us, and the conversation going deeper. His girlfriend had moved in. Work was complicated. He'd had a health scare in September, something with his blood pressure, nothing serious, but it had rattled him. "I tried to text you in September," he said. "Old number." "I got a new phone," I said, which was close enough to true. He looked at me. Marcus had the kind of face that was hard to lie to, not because he pushed, but because he just waited, patient, until you found your way to the real thing. "We missed Owen at the birthday," he said. "I heard about that. I didn't know about it until after." A pause. "Mara knew. I sent the invitation to both of you." I looked at my beer. "Yeah," I said. I gathered. He didn't press. That was the thing about Marcus. He understood what it meant when someone said I gathered in that particular tone of voice, and he gave it room. We stayed 2 hours. When I left, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, like I'd taken a full breath, like there was space in my lungs that I'd forgotten was there. It was such a simple thing. A beer and 2 hours with a friend. The fact that it felt extraordinary told me everything I needed to know about what my life had become. I started paying attention to my phone in a new way, not obsessively, but deliberately. I moved it to my coat pocket at home rather than leaving it on the counter. I noticed that Mara's gaze tracked the change. She didn't say anything, but she noticed. One evening I came home to find she'd reorganized my home office. She framed it as a Christmas cleaning project. The filing cabinet had been sorted, the shelf above my desk rearranged. Papers that had been loose in my in-tray were now in labeled folders. She stood in the doorway while I looked around, and her expression was the one she used when she was expecting to be thanked. "I appreciate the thought," I said, "but I need to know where things are when I'm working." "Everything's labeled," she said. "I made it easier. You did it without asking me." "Daniel." The patient's wearing thin tone again, the one I knew so well. "I can't do anything right. I organize your phone, you're upset. I organize your office, you're upset. At some point you have to decide whether you want a partner or a roommate." I looked at her for a moment. Something was different about this exchange, and I tried to locate it. Then I understood. I wasn't smoothing it over. I want a partner, I said. But a partner asks first. A partner doesn't make unilateral decisions about my space and frame them as gifts. She stared at me. I'd never said anything quite that directly before, and the room recognized it. A 10-second silence. Fine, she said. She turned and walked away. I called my friend Joel that week, my first conversation with him in almost 5 months. He was easy to talk to, same as always. We laughed through the first 20 minutes, and then he said, "Man, you went dark for a while." "I know," I said. "You good?" "Getting there." He told me that Pete had asked after me, that their usual Sunday morning run had a standing open invitation for me if I ever wanted to rejoin it. I said I might take them up on that. 3 days later, I told Mara I was planning to run with Joel and Pete on Sunday morning. I told her, not asked her. I watched her face register the difference. "That's fine," she said. "What time will you be back?" "By 10 probably." She nodded. She didn't offer a follow-up question or a competing priority. She just nodded. And I could see, very clearly, that something was recalibrating in her, that the direct statement rather than the nervous check-in had shifted something, and she wasn't sure yet how to absorb it. I went to bed that night and lay in the dark thinking about the 9 years of our marriage, sorting through them the way I sorted through structural calculations, looking for the load-bearing elements, the places where stress had accumulated undetected, the joints that had been under pressure far longer than they were built for. I understood something that night that I should have understood years earlier. I had confused peace with safety. A quiet house isn't a healthy house. A partner who never raises her voice can still be dismantling something, methodically, over years, and the silence makes it harder to name and harder to fight. The fact of the contact sat at the center of everything. It was the clearest, most concrete evidence of something I could no longer explain away, an action taken on my phone, on my personal property, without my knowledge or consent, and explained afterward as housekeeping. Framed as love, I started writing things down. Not dramatically. I bought a small notebook, kept it in my coat pocket, and each evening I wrote one sentence. A thing I'd noticed. A moment that had landed wrong. By mid-December, I had 2 pages of sentences, and reading them in sequence was different from experiencing them one at a time. In sequence, they told a story. I didn't know it then. This is what she was living with in those weeks. He was different. I could feel it, and I couldn't account for it. And that was the worst kind of feeling, something changing underground, not visible yet, not graspable. He was going to runs on Sundays. He was keeping his phone closer. He had a new energy in his voice when he talked about work, and less of that careful deference in his face when I made suggestions. I kept waiting for the old version to come back, the one that would smooth things over, that would absorb my redirects and let the discomfort pass. He wasn't letting things pass anymore. I knew I was losing ground. I didn't know how to stop losing it without admitting what I'd been doing. And admitting what I'd been doing felt like the thing that would end everything. So I did what I always did when I was frightened. I tightened. I added pressure. I found more things to organize, more schedules to manage, more ways to make myself necessary. I thought if I was useful enough, constant enough, woven deeply enough into the logistics of his life, he couldn't leave without leaving his whole life. I thought that was love. I really did for a while. Christmas was quiet and tightly managed. Mara had planned every hour of the holiday weekend. A color-coded itinerary on the kitchen whiteboard that I looked at on Christmas Eve morning and felt something collapse inside me. Not the itinerary itself. The fact that every hour of our family's Christmas had been organized to run through her. Owen was happy. That was real. He got the Lego set he'd been asking for and spent Christmas afternoon building it on the living room floor while Mara's sister's family sat in the kitchen eating pie and talking. I sat next to Owen and helped him find the right pieces. His head was bent over the instructions, and he said without looking up, "Dad, do you know Marcus is having a New Year's party?" "I heard something about that," I said. "Can we go?" "We'll see," I said. "I'll look into it." He handed me a small plastic brick. Mom said probably not. I looked at the side of his face. He was concentrating on his instructions and wasn't looking at me, but his voice had something in it. Not sadness, exactly, but the very beginning of learning to expect no. That was the moment I decided the conversation had to happen. Not for me anymore. For him. New Year's Eve. Owen was at Mara's mother's house for the night. Her parents had offered to take him so we could celebrate, which was kind of them. even though neither of us was in the mood to celebrate anything. We were home alone for the first time in months, and the house had a particular quality of silence. Not the comfortable quiet of a Sunday afternoon, but something tighter. We both felt it. Even the air in the kitchen was careful. I made dinner. A simple one, pasta, a salad, the bread Mara liked from the bakery on Fifth. She set the table without being asked, and we sat down, and we were halfway through the meal when I put down my fork and said, "I want to talk about something." She looked up. "I want to talk about what's been happening," I said. "Not just the phone contacts. The whole of it. The pattern." She set down her fork too. Slowly. "Okay," she said. "I've been going back through the last couple of years," I said. "And I've been counting. Every friend I see less often than I used to. Every invitation I've declined that came from outside this house. Every Sunday and Thursday and random Tuesday evening that gradually got absorbed into something else. And I want to understand, I genuinely want to understand, whether you see that same pattern I see." She was quiet for a moment. Her hands were flat on the table. "What pattern?" she said. And there it was, the slight recalibration, the question designed to make me define my terms before she'd committed to anything. I recognized it now in a way I hadn't always. "You've been managing who I spend time with," I said. "Consistently, over years. My contacts. The Kilpatrick's lunches. Marcus's birthday. Joel, Pete, Ben from college. Trish from my office. You found a way to make each one feel like my choice, but it wasn't my choice. It was pressure applied so consistently and so gently that I didn't name it until it had already happened." She looked at me with an expression that was carefully assembled, not defensive, not caught, but something else. Something that was preparing a response. "That's an interesting interpretation," she said. "It's not an interpretation. It's a calendar. Daniel." Her voice was steady, measured. "I think you're rewriting history here. I have never told you not to see your friends. Never. If you drifted from people, that's a choice you made. I want to be very careful here," I said, "because I've been thinking about this for months, and I know how you argue. I know that what's going to happen next is that you're going to talk about how you've supported me, how you've taken care of things, how I'm the one who doesn't appreciate what goes into keeping this family running. And all of that is probably going to be true, and none of it is what I'm talking about." She looked at me. A long look. "You deleted my friends' numbers," I said. "You did it deliberately. You told me it was cleaning. And then when I called you on it, you made me feel like the problem was that I didn't ask for help. I made one mistake with your phone," she said, "and you're turning it into a character indictment. It's not one mistake. Name another one." Her chin was up now, the composure shifting towards something sharper. "Name one specific thing I did that wasn't about trying to take care of you and Owen." "Marcus's birthday party." A pause, smaller than the previous ones. "I didn't think it was a priority," she said. "You didn't ask me. I make 1,000 decisions a week for this family without asking you, because that's what keeping a household running looks like. You're not here for 90% of them." "You're right," I said, "and I trust you with those. But you don't get to apply that logic to my relationships. My friends are not a household decision." She stood up. She moved to the counter and stood with her back to me for a moment. When she turned around, something in her face had shifted, not softened, but changed lane. "I can't believe this," she said. "I do everything for this family. Everything. I manage Owen's schedule. I manage the house. I manage our social calendar. I stay up at night worrying about our finances. I work full-time and come home and keep everything running. And you are sitting here making me feel like a criminal because I cleaned up your phone and made one call about a birthday party." "Mara, no. Let me finish." Her voice had risen, just slightly, the first time in this conversation. "You've been distant for months. You've been pulling away, going on runs without telling me, staying late, keeping your phone in your pocket like I'm a threat. And now you've decided I'm some kind of controlling monster. And the evidence is that I deleted a few contacts? That's what this is about. After 9 years. It's not about the contacts," I said. "I just said that." "Then what is it about, Daniel?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're building a case. You've been building it for months. I felt it. And instead of coming to me, instead of saying, 'Mara, I feel like something's off,' you've been collecting evidence and waiting for the right moment to put me on trial." I let that sit. "I tried to say something was off," I said. "In October. About the contacts. You redirected. Because you came at me like an interrogator instead of a husband. I came at you with a question. The way you asked it was not a question." I looked at her. I let the silence hold. She looked back at me, waiting for me to smooth it over, I realized. Waiting for me to offer something that would let her lead us back to manageable. That was the pattern. She'd push, I'd cushion. She'd escalate, I'd absorb. She'd win the field not by taking it, but by making it too uncomfortable for me to hold. I didn't say anything. She filled the silence. I am not controlling, she said. I have never tried to control you. I love you. Everything I do comes from that. And you sitting here telling me I've been some kind of architect of your social isolation, when you have never once told me you felt isolated, when you've agreed to every plan we've made, when you have always, she stopped. Her voice had taken on a new texture, something that wasn't quite anger anymore. I said, I agreed to everything because you made it feel like the alternative was a fight I didn't have energy to have. That's not agreement. That's exhaustion. She put her hands on the counter. Her knuckles were white. So now I'm the reason you're tired, she said. I'm the reason you're unhappy. 9 years, 1 child, everything I've built for this family, and I'm the problem. I didn't say problem, I said. I said pattern. Same thing. It really isn't. The fight went on. She pressed on me from several angles, invoking the years, invoking Owen, invoking her own sacrifices and her own loneliness, cycling between accusation and justification. And I held my position. Not loudly, not angrily. I just kept coming back to the same things. The contacts, the birthday, the Kilpatrick's lunches, the Sunday mornings, the conversations that had felt like choices but were constructed to make only one choice comfortable. She wasn't going to give me a clean admission. I understood that. Her confrontation reaction was to attack the methodology rather than the substance, to make the problem not what she had done, but how I had noticed it, how I had framed it, how I had chosen to raise it. Every fact I named became evidence of my character failing rather than hers. I said almost nothing after a certain point. I let her talk, and the less I responded, the more the room filled with what wasn't being answered, and we both felt the weight of it accumulating. At 11:30, she said she was going to bed. I said goodnight. She paused at the doorway. I thought she was going to say something. Instead, she looked at me once more, a long, unreadable look, and went upstairs. I sat at the kitchen table until midnight, listening to the neighbors across the street set off a few small fireworks. The new year arrived quietly in my kitchen, in the dark, with the remnants of dinner still on the table and a feeling in my chest like something had finally, permanently shifted into a new position. January was cold and spacious. Mara and I moved around each other carefully in the days after New Year's Eve. Not hostile, not warm, but like two people in a house that had been measured and found to be exactly the same size as them. No room to spare. Owen came home from his grandmother's oblivious and bright-eyed and full of stories about fireworks, and stayed up too late and fell asleep on the couch, and I carried him to bed and stood in the doorway of his room for a while, watching him sleep. That was the moment I knew I wasn't going to be able to simply forgive and return to the version of the marriage that existed before. Not because I didn't want to save it. I had wanted to, badly, for a long time. But the wanting had always been conditional on something being different, and I'd spent years telling myself it would get different on its own if I was patient enough, agreeable enough, present enough. It hadn't gotten different. I had just gotten quieter. Mara made an appointment with a couples therapist. She told me about it on a Tuesday evening, and she said it carefully, not as a demand, not as a condition, but as an offering, a gesture. Her voice was different than it had been on New Year's Eve, softer, less defended. I want to understand, she said. I want to work through it. I went to the first session. Our therapist was a calm, 70s woman named Dr. Sandra Voss, whose office smelled like cedar and who had the gift of asking a single question and then waiting in absolute stillness for the answer. The first session was mostly preamble. The second one was harder. In the second session, Mara began to talk. And I mean talk. Not the managed, performance-calibrated version I was used to, but something raw. Dr. Voss had a way of making the space feel very low stakes and very serious at the same time. And in that space, something gave way in Mara. She talked for a long time. I sat and listened. I know what I did was wrong, she said. I've known for a while. But knowing it's wrong and understanding why you did it are different things, and I spent so long focused on the mechanics, keeping track of everything, making everything run, that I didn't ask myself why I needed to do it. She stopped. Dr. Voss waited. My dad left when I was 12, she said. I don't talk about it because I've talked about it so much in my own head that it feels like something I've already processed. But I haven't, obviously. A short, dry exhale. He didn't leave for another woman, exactly. He just pulled his attention somewhere else. He got interested in things that weren't us. His friends, his projects, his own independent life that didn't require my mother or me. And he was perfectly kind while he was doing it. That was the thing. He was pleasant and present, and slowly, over about 2 years, he just drifted until one day he was gone. She paused. Her hands were in her lap. I was terrified of that happening again. Not rationally. I knew Daniel wasn't my father. But the fear didn't care about the rationality. When Daniel had friendships that pulled his attention outward, when he had people in his life who wanted him to show up somewhere that wasn't here, I felt it the way I felt it at 12. This low-level dread. This sense of watching someone begin to drift. Daniel. She stopped using my name in third person and said it directly. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I handled it the way I handled it. I know what I was doing was wrong. It was wrong to go through your phone. It was wrong to create conditions that made it easier for you to stay close to me than to maintain outside relationships. I was afraid, and I used that fear as a permission slip to do things I should never have done. I said, "How long had you been afraid?" "Since about year 3, she said. "Maybe earlier." We stayed in that room for another 40 minutes after that, and when we left Dr. Voss's office, the winter light was sharp and low and the street was quiet. We drove home without speaking. It wasn't hostile. It was the silence of two people trying to hold something difficult and not drop it. I cooked dinner that night. Owen came in while I was chopping and sat at the island and told me everything about his day at school in the run-on, recursive way that 7-year-olds narrate their lives. Mara stood at the counter nearby and listened with a smile on her face. And for a moment the kitchen felt almost the way it used to feel, and I let myself stay in that feeling without pushing it away. But later, after Owen was in bed, I went to the garage, not to be away from Mara, just to think. And I sat on the stepladder and looked at the back wall and asked myself the honest question. The honest question was, did I still trust her? And the honest answer was, I didn't know. I wanted to. I was trying to. But 9 years of behavior doesn't reverse in one honest conversation, however real and however brave. The fear that had driven Mara to do what she'd done was a fear she'd carried for 20-some years before she met me, and it had been running our marriage for the better part of a decade without my knowing. Understanding why something happened doesn't automatically make it unhappen. I had tried, for a long time, to build something on the assumption that if I kept the peace, the structure would hold. What I understood now, sitting on that stepladder in the cold garage in January, was that peace isn't the same as foundation. It's just quiet. You can have a very quiet building and still have a building that isn't safe to stand in. We went back to Dr. Voss 4 more times over the following 6 weeks. The sessions were real, I want to say that. Mara worked hard, harder than I expected. She was honest in ways that clearly cost her. She stopped managing the temperature of our conversations and let things be uncomfortable. And that was genuinely different. But something in me wouldn't fully come back. And I sat with that, trying to figure out whether it was grief taking its time or something more permanent. February. I came home from work one evening, and Owen met me at the door. His face was a lit-up rectangle of excitement, because he'd learned that day that his class was going to a science museum in Des Moines next month. And did I know that they had a whole section about bridges, and could I come in as a guest speaker? Because his friend Caleb's dad had come in and talked about computers, and he thought it would be really cool if I could talk about bridges. Absolutely, I said, and I meant it so completely that he hugged my waist. Mara was in the kitchen. She'd heard. She was smiling, and her eyes were wet, just slightly, and she didn't try to manage it. She just let it be there on her face. He's been planning to ask you that for 2 days, she said. I kind of guessed, I said. We ate dinner. Owen talked about bridges. We managed, the 3 of us, an evening that felt genuinely kind. Later that night, Mara sat next to me on the couch. Owen was asleep. The television was off. She said, I know you're still figuring out whether you can come back from this. I looked at her. I can see it, she said, and I'm not going to pretend I can't. I am still figuring it out, I said. She nodded. I know. A pause. I just want you to know that whatever you decide, I understand it. You don't owe me forgiveness. I looked at the dark television screen. The house was very quiet. That might be the most honest thing you've said to me in years, I said. She laughed, a small, sad sound. Yeah, probably. We separated in April. Quietly, without a scene, without a lawyer's letter on the doorstep or a shouting match in the driveway. I moved into a furnished apartment on the north side of Cedar Falls, a decent place, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen window that faced east so it got the morning light. Owen stayed primarily with Mara during the week and came to me on weekends and every Wednesday. The day I moved my things out, Mara sat at the kitchen table and watched me carry boxes. She didn't offer to help, and I didn't ask her to. Owen was at school. At the door, carrying the last box, I stopped and looked at her. "I don't hate you," I said. "I want you to know that." "I know," she said. "I know you don't." I nodded. I went to my car. I drove to my new apartment in the April light and stood in the empty living room for a while, listening to the quiet. It was a different kind of quiet than the house on Birchwood Lane. No accumulated weight in it. No history. No careful management of temperature. Just a room at the beginning of whatever it was going to be. Marcus helped me move a bookcase in that weekend. We ordered pizza and talked until midnight, and he didn't once make it about anything other than being there, which is what good friends do. Joel showed up with a six-pack the following Wednesday evening. We sat on my small balcony in the late April chill, and he said, "How are you, actually?" "Better," I said. "A little at a time." "That's how it works," he said. Owen stood in my new kitchen the first Saturday he stayed over, looking around like he was taking an inventory. "It's smaller than home," he said. "It is," I agreed. He thought about this for a moment. "But you have 2 chairs at the table," he said, "so we can still have breakfast." "That was the plan," I said. He nodded, satisfied. He went to explore the second bedroom, which I'd set up with his things, a few books, a small Lego set, his Triceratops on the windowsill. I heard him in there for a few minutes, rearranging. Then he came out and said, "Can we go to Marcus's this weekend?" "I'll text him," I said. I got out my phone. All my contacts were where I'd put them, every one of them, in my own hand. She didn't set out to build a cage. That's the detail that stayed with me longest after everything was over. Not the anger, not the specific acts, but the fact that Mara genuinely believed she was building something protective. She learned at 12 that love could withdraw without warning, drift outward, and one day simply not come back. She carried that knowledge into every room of our marriage, and she treated it like engineering information, something to be managed, planned around, controlled. The tragedy wasn't that she was malicious. The tragedy was that she was afraid, and she'd never found any way to be afraid that didn't cost the people closest to her. But I have to account for my own contribution to what happened. I was a conflict avoider who had spent his entire adult life choosing peace over honesty, not because I was weak, but because I had been trained from childhood to believe that keeping things smooth was the same as keeping things safe. Mara's control needed a particular kind of person to work on, someone who would absorb the redirection, find the charitable interpretation, fill the silence with accommodation. I was precisely that person. We found each other the way certain pressures and certain weaknesses find each other, inevitably, and with a logic that only looks obvious in hindsight. What the story reveals, across all its layered details, is how control dressed as love evades detection for so long. It evades detection because the person wielding it usually means it as love. The distortion is real, but it coexists with genuine feeling, genuine commitment, genuine sacrifice. Mara worked hard, was devoted to Owen, managed enormous complexity. None of that was false. The control and the love existed simultaneously, and that coexistence is precisely what made it so hard to name for so long. You can't clearly see a cage you're standing inside when the walls are built from real affection. The accumulation effect is what ultimately did the most damage. No single act, not the deleted contacts, not Marcus's birthday, not the Kilpatrick's lunches, would have been enough on its own to unravel a 9-year marriage. It was the sequence, one small pressure after another, each one explicable in isolation, each one building a slightly smaller version of my world until I was living inside a circumference I hadn't chosen and hadn't consciously agreed to. That's how this kind of erosion works. It doesn't arrive all at once, in a form you can point to and name. It arrives as helpfulness, as care, as the particular attentiveness of someone who is paying very close attention to everything you do. What I've come to understand, not bitterly, but clearly, is that there's a version of love that is fundamentally about managing fear rather than trusting the other person. Mara loved me. I don't doubt that. But her love had never been fully disentangled from the terror of being left. And when those two things live in the same space, the love doesn't always win. Fear is patient and strategic in a way that love isn't. Fear plans ahead. Fear deletes the contacts. The forgiveness I couldn't sustain wasn't about punishment. I want to be clear about that. I tried to forgive. I sat in Dr. Voss's office and listened to Mara explain her fear with real honesty, and I felt the pull toward returning. The same pull I'd always felt toward peace, toward continuity, toward the life we'd built on Birchwood Lane. But there's a difference between understanding why someone did something and believing they'll find a different way to handle the same fear next time. Understanding came easily. The belief wouldn't come, no matter how long I waited for it. Owen will be fine. I hold on to that. He's resilient and well-loved and has two parents who are trying, in separate kitchens, to be the best version of themselves for him. He will grow up knowing that when things get hard, his father didn't run from the difficulty. He named it, worked through it, and made a hard decision clearly and without drama. Whether that's a lesson he'll use someday, I don't know. But he'll have it. What hurts most, looking back, isn't the loss of the marriage. It's the years I spent mistaking management for love and calling the result contentment. I had a life that looked solid from the outside and had been under a quiet, invisible pressure from within, and I walked through it every day without once asking myself whether the peace I felt was real or just the absence of conflict. I think about other people who live inside exactly that distinction, who confuse the stillness that comes from having your world managed with the stillness that comes from being genuinely free inside a relationship. They're completely different feelings. One of them grows. One of them contracts. The thing I tell anyone who finds themselves counting how many friends they've seen lately: count. Actually count. If the number has been shrinking for years and you can't name a single choice that clearly produced the shrinkage, start asking questions. Not angrily, just clearly. You're allowed to take up space in your own life. That's not a betrayal of anyone who loves you. If it feels like one, that's worth examining.